Protect all your devices. This hot take is going to be so scorching. I got to start a Monday at the risk of burning everything down. It's the Podcast Daily. It's Bill Landis, Jeremy Birmingham. I'm Austin Ward. And Ohio State's defensive line is going to be good, Bill. I think they're going to be the best defensive line in America.
Oh, man. See, there's some good D lines out there.
There are. Are there as many that are as deep as this one? I'd like to. I guess we're talking about Ohio State and Georgia, and that's about it, right?
Oregon might be all right. Michigan, yeah. There's some good ones out there, but Ohio State is in the conversation for sure. Yeah,
the Big Ten is the conference for defensive line play, and as it always has been,
especially because of those famous, vaunted Big Ten defensive lines at Oregon and USC.
Yes,
that's right.
Okay,
a lot of history there.
All right, well, let's start the week. It is the latest spring position review. We are looking at the defensive line. I didn't think there was going to be a lot to disagree about or argue or really get too hot with the takes here because they're very good. We know that they're very good. They're veteran. They're able to keep everyone from that starting rotation outside of Mike Hall Jr. They're bringing along the next wave of really talented guys. We talked about that throughout camp. It's very impressive to watch what Larry Johnson has to work with here heading into 2024.
Yeah, I think like they should be maybe the best in the country, right? I think a lot of it will depend on that second group that you're talking about, right? Because Jack and JT and Tyleek and Ty are very good. That's I would put that foursome up against probably any in the country. To your point to start the show, I think like the truly elite, great, game wrecking defensive lines. Probably need a little more than that, especially now in this world where we're going to be playing more football games than we normally do. But the fact that they have what they have like as the first four, like I don't know, the floor is like as high as it could possibly be. The ceiling is pretty freaking high too. It's just a matter of like how much can they maybe push it past where it's been the last couple of years. Because I would say like last year they were a good defensive line. Were they like an excellent all-time defensive line? No, there's something short of that, but I think they have an opportunity to be that this year, like to get back into that conversation that we've had many times about past off or Ohio State defensive lines.
Why do you hold on? Yeah, I was just gonna say, like, what do you mean by that, though, Bill?
I mean, like truly best in the country, like statistical production, right? It's not just like solid. Like last year, they were a solid defensive line, and they did things that I think like tend to go unnoticed too. And Jim Knowles has made the point of bringing this up. I think like practically every time we've talked to him over the last year of like how good the defensive tackles were, in particular about like making tackles against the run. And it's just like things maybe you take for granted, but like look at the tackle numbers from the defensive tackles last year. There was a serious uptick, and that's part of the reason why I felt like the linebackers maybe weren't as productive. Like that's great. Like you absolutely need that, but I still don't know that Ohio State lined up every week and like struck fear into the opposing offense. And like that's kind of what I'm talking about, because we've seen what that looks like too. And I'm not merely talking about Chase Young being a singular individual who was unblockable. I'm talking about four guys up front that you feel like you just don't have any chance of blocking. And I think this group has the chance to get there for sure. But I don't know that it's been quite to that level probably for, 4 years or so.
Yeah, I was going to say, that's my question. I mean, I think that you're right on, Bill, when you talk about the floor. Like it's as high as any group in the country. I don't know how far away are these guys from their ceiling. That's the question you really have with Ohio State. Like we saw Jack Sawyer a year ago, the last 4 or 5 games of the year, crank it up to a level that I don't know that anyone really was sure he had. So is that as high as it goes for him, or was this spring another launching board for him to be even better? JT Tuimoloau is one of the most athletic, and like he doesn't get recognized as on the freaks list or any of those things, but like that dude is freaky, and Ohio State has just not allowed him to really be unleashed as a pass rusher, because the goal is to contain on the front four and let everything spill out. And when you have players like Jack, when you have players like JT, do you at some point just say, go get him? And I'm not sure if Ohio State's going to do that or not. Probably not this year, because the linebacker play is going to be a question mark because there is, uncertainty there where there wasn't heading into last year. You figure if they would have had a year to really let Jack and JT go and be just pass rushers off the edge, it would have been a year ago when you trusted Tommy and Steele the way that they did. So I just don't know, like, how much more can they get to? And that's my biggest question with them.
I mean, if that last 5 games of Jack Sawyer is the ceiling, that's pretty darn good. That's borderline first round NFL draft pick type production. Yeah. He was phenomenal against Missouri and a very good defensive line there. And like when we're talking about spring, we're not really learning that much about JT Tuimoloau and Jack Sawyer and Tyleik Williams and Ty Hamilton because they did not have to take a lot of reps. Like we will be talking a ton about what that top 4 can do, and the fact that Mike Hall was a second round draft pick, and like the rotation is pretty much going to be the exact same at the top that it was last year. That's a mouthful to think about right there. But spring wasn't really about those guys, Bill. It was about that next wave that we alluded to, and that's not just Kenyatta Jackson and Caden Curry, who are borderline well-known commodities going into year 3 for Ohio State, but a bunch of guys, most notably at defensive tackle.
Yeah, and I thought those guys had a good spring, right? It was really encouraging to hear fairly early on, if I remember correctly, that Larry Johnson thought that Jason Moore was the guy who was kind of like sticking out most among that group of defensive tackles. But like he didn't cite in a way that was like Jason Moore's good and everyone else is not giving us what we need. It was like this second group has played very well, and on top of that, like Jason Moore seems to like now have his feet under him. So like that was great to hear. I thought it showed up a little bit in the spring game too. Like I think there's a lot of reason to be really high on Caden McDonald, and then I like truly feel like Hero Kanu is ready to kind of make a jump here. I always think about what he did against Wisconsin last year and can't get that out of my head. But I think it was just a flash of like his potential, and in an odd way, it didn't lead to much last year. But I still think like Larry Johnson like recognizes it too, and he'd be the guy who I'd say is probably the third tackle right now. And I think he's a guy who's ready to be relied upon to kind of carry that burden. So it was a fairly large question mark, I think, for me going into the spring. Like, just what are they going to get out of the tackles beyond Tyleik and Ty Hamilton? And I don't know about you guys, but I came out of spring pretty encouraged by what that group was able to do and kind of the trajectory that they're on.
100%. And to be clear, when I'm talking about where I'm wondering about the ceiling, most of that question mark to me goes to the coaching staff and how much they're going to let those guys go, because we saw what Jack was able to do when the pass rush was just a little bit more free towards the end of the season. And I don't know that the Buckeyes are in a position to let those guys just be the attack dogs that they need to be. As far as defensive tackles go, I mean, I love what we saw to Tyleik Williams a year ago. I thought that Mike Hall had the best NFL upside. But Tyleik Williams, the year he had, has put himself into the conversation. He's athletically pretty unique in his size and quickness. But when you look at the best defensive tackles around the country, when you look at the best pair of defensive tackles, which is in Ann Arbor, unfortunately, with Mason Graham and Kenneth Grant, like, it's the size and speed and the combination that those guys have that is, and the productivity that they have, which is what makes them really stand out. And I think Ohio State desperately needs someone like Hero Kanu or Jason Moore, who is just that physical freak to really dominate the inside of the line. And Ty Hamilton is great, solid player, great against the run. I'm interested to see if they let him do a little bit more in the pass rush game this year, because we saw with his brother Devon, like that's really when it happened for him, was in the last year of his career. But between Hero Kanu and Jason Moore and Caden McDonald, and even some growing buzz towards the end of spring finally for Tywone Malone, like that group is significantly better than it was a year ago.
That's why I thought it was odd, Berm, that last week there was any conversation at all that maybe Ohio State would look at a defensive tackle in the portal. That didn't make a lot of sense in terms of an opportunity for somebody outside the program, or even for something that filled a need on Ohio State's roster. Did you think there was much to that last week?
I mean, Derek, what's his last name?
Harmon.
Derek Harmon, the kid from Michigan State, who entered the portal in December. Ohio State was very close to landing then. When he got back in the portal, they had continued the conversation, but it was not going to become a very serious one because the NIL opportunity that Ohio State was offering was significantly lower than Oregon and other schools, Oregon where he landed. But I think it's a sign that Ohio State also wasn't all the way in, because they have proven this offseason that if they really want to get involved in the NIL battle, they can. And since they didn't do that, I think it was an indicator that, hey, they're pretty happy where they are, but they weren't going to look a gift horse in the mouth. Like I'm saying, you have a 6'5", 320-pound defensive tackle like that. Like, it's like, well, you should probably take a look, because the alternative is that he ends up playing on the team that you're going to have to play again multiple times.
You just sign the free agent so that somebody else can't.
Yeah,
that's right.
Who's the most intriguing defensive lineman on this roster? And Bill, why is it Mitchell Melton?
Yeah, I think it really is Mitchell Melton, right? Like, every time he plays, which has been infrequently in his career, like, I just feel like he does something that makes you like pay attention. Just like, oh, that was pretty good. And I thought, like, it's hard, right, in the spring game, because he's not always going up against starting caliber tackles, and I try to keep that in mind, but he just feels like he has a really good idea of what he's doing on every pass rush. And I feel like he's pretty creative, and like a little savvy, and like he has a savviness to him that you would expect of a player that's been in college football as long as Mitchell Melton has, but like he doesn't have the game's worth of experience to like actually have it, which I think just kind of speaks to his like sort of natural innate ability to figure stuff out. And he really looks to me like somebody who can help them. Like, I don't know. Now, granted, like maybe Kenyatta Jackson and Caden Curry have not gotten the opportunities to this point that we thought they would get. And when they are out there, they're going against better competition typically than Mitchell Melton is when he is out there in games as infrequently as that's been. But I still think Mitchell Melton like looks better when he's out there than those two guys have. So, and it's not to say that like Kenyatta Jackson and Caden Curry shouldn't play, because they should, because Ohio State needs to play defensive line depth. But I really believe that Mitchell Melton like needs to be a part of that thought process now. I really don't know why he wasn't last year. And I thought at times last year they could have used his help. And I feel even stronger about that now, because it just seems like he had a really good spring and he's healthy. And I don't know, just like a smart, hard-nosed dude who gives you a little bit extra in the pass rush, which I think they need.
I mentioned after the spring game on Snap Judgments presented by Byers Auto that there's a good portion of the Ohio State program, people inside of it, who thought that Mitchell Melton is the best pass rusher on the team and has been for a couple of years. But the inability to be on the field has obviously prevented that from materializing. But clearly he's taken advantage of the mental reps he's had, because he does look, savvy is the right word. He just seems to be very like smart when he's on the field. To me, the intrigue, the guy that is still Kenyatta Jackson, like he's 6'6", he's 260 pounds. He's got everything you want athletically, got everything you want from a pass rush frame wise, like the long arms, like everything about him is built to be a dominant edge rusher, but we just haven't seen him take the next step yet. And some of that I think is not his fault, because again, Ohio State has been tight with the rotation at defensive end last year. When he really had a chance to play, they didn't really rotate much at that spot. And there was a lot of noise around him this offseason as far as will he or won't he transfer, and back in December, and then people speculating about it even in the spring window. Bottom line is that Kenyatta Jackson has the athletic ability and the natural talent to elevate this defensive line more than anybody in the room does. Like if this room is going to go from really good to like all-time great, it's because Kenyatta Jackson takes a step up, not because anybody else that is involved. If he's able to become what we thought he could be at the start of last year, then the entire room and the dynamic in the room changes more than anybody else.
Yeah. And both of those guys talked throughout spring about why that may not have happened for them last year. For Mitchell Melton, more specifically, it was the nature of that injury and the long-term rehab. I mentioned this a few weeks ago, but I was talking to him about it coming out of spring. It's like, well, I'm not sure that people realize the severity and that some people never come back and play football again. So yes, he was not ruled out. He was available for a lot of games last season, but he was still not at 100% of his capacity. And I mean, we've really not seen that since he got hurt in the spring game 2 years ago from him, outside of, a few flashes in practice. And certainly what we saw in camp in March and April was exciting. And Kenyatta Jackson, I think it was about continuing, to fine tune technique, understand what was being asked of him by Larry Johnson, again, part of that too is also the rotation that Berm alluded to. And he said that Kenyatta Jackson said himself in one of his media availabilities this spring, like, had to have a conversation with Larry about understanding that and where my role fits in that. And I think that sometimes it's a physical thing, like it is with Melton. Sometimes it's a mental and physical development and maturation process for players. Sometimes it's also an understanding of the coaches of what they have and adjusting. And I think that for both of those guys and for Larry Johnson throughout spring, like, again, Larry doesn't have to prove anything at this point in his career, but we saw several new things from him, which I think is significant. Most notably, we latched on, Bill, to the 5-man.
The 5-man front that Ohio State was playing in the spring game. Bill, when you see that, is there hope that Larry Johnson is just going to continue to evolve? And it seems unusual for a guy that's been a coach as long as he has to start doing new things now. But I think that's a pretty positive, don't you?
Yeah, I think so. Especially, I guess over the last couple of years, there have been times where I think it's been pretty obvious that Larry and Jim Knowles maybe have not been simpatico on how to use a defensive front. And it seems like maybe they're a little more on the same page now, at least as it pertains to this idea of playing 5 defensive linemen. Because like Larry will get on board with that. Like, hey, you want to play more, my guy? Sure, well, let's do that. I just don't want to do the thing where you take one of them off the field and then put somebody else in their place. So I think that they're gonna use it. How much, I don't know. I would love to see them do some stuff too, where like they play Jack and JT inside some, and maybe like throw Mitchell Melton out there on the edge, or maybe throw Caden Curry out there on the edge. Like I think you could potentially get pretty creative with it, with the different kind of skill sets and body types they do have up front. They even have like bigger defensive tackles. A couple of them, like Caden McDonald and Tyleik Williams, are bigger than Ohio State typically is at that position. Like, can be like more of a traditional nose in some of those looks too. So it's just a matter of Ohio State kind of doing the thing we talk about a lot of off season. It's like you have all this talent on hand. How do you choose to deploy it in a way that is like, difficult for offenses to handle, but also doesn't put too much on the plate of your guys defensively to the point where they really can't handle it or operate it effectively. So like, I know Jim Knowles like kind of threw it out there as a piece of red meat for us to talk about. I think we saw it for one snap in the spring game, and it looked pretty good on that one snap. So I don't know if that's like a thing to throw out there to distract us, or a thing that they're actually going to do in the fall. But I am inclined to believe that they might actually do it this fall, only because they seem to have the personnel to pull it off.
There's a reason you recruit 6'6", 275, 280-pound defensive ends, right? Like, it's so that you can move them around, so that you can move Jack inside, so you can move JT inside. You can have I think about like a 4-man front of Kenyatta Jackson, Jack, Jason Moore, and JT on the field at the same time. And like, that's pretty interesting to me. Like, the Ohio State changed their entire defensive line philosophy in the 2017 season when it came to the Rushman package and having the 4 big defensive ends on the field at the same time. And we just didn't see that in the last couple of years. And I mean, maybe they were waiting for Jack and JT to get to the point where they could feel comfortable with that stuff, or maybe they didn't have enough guys there to do that, or maybe they didn't have the bigger 3-tech that they do now with Jason Moore. Like, I don't know what it is exactly, but like, it seems like that package has just been forgotten in the last 2 years.
It seems like I didn't heed my own advice to start the show and melted down my computer and my videos, my camera, everything. I don't know what is going on.
All right. We knew exactly what you were saying.
Yeah, good. Well, I had a lot more on my mind, but we don't need to get into that. We'll just save it for another day on the podcast daily. Thanks for starting your week right here with us. Have a great Monday. For Bill Landis and Jeremy Birmingham, I'm Austin Ward. We'll see you later.